Good morning and welcome to the Sunday morning sermon for Black Rock Baptist Church. For the last month and a half or so, we have been looking at a series of messages entitled A Grace-Driven Church. And we're going to finish that series of messages this morning as we look at number 6 in the series entitled Exalting in the Glory of Christ. Psalm 95, verses 1 through 7 read this way. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry ground. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. As I said, this is the last in the series of sermons designed to help us as churches to better understand what it means to be a grace-driven church. And for the last 6 weeks, we've studied God's Word together to help us to see how grace affects the 5 things that we are called to do as a church. We've discovered that grace influences the way that we grow as Christians, or discipleship. It affects our efforts in evangelism. It enriches our fellowship together. Grace is also our motivation to minister to the physical needs in our community and in our world. And today we're focusing on the fact that a proper understanding of grace also influences the way that we worship together. You know, I don't think we can overstate the importance of worship. In his book, The Life of the Church, Lavden Brown writes this. He says, worship is to the church like breathing to the human organism. It's absolutely necessary. The church must worship to live. But it must not stop with worship. Worship provides the inspiration for everything else the church does. And I think he's right. If we are to be a healthy church, then a proper attitude about worship is vital because it will keep us strong in everything else that we do, like evangelism and ministry and discipleship, fellowship. And grace affects our worship as well. Worship is our weekly corporate response to the merciful grace of God. But you know, as important as worship is, many Christians still don't understand it. They don't understand worship. Misconceptions about worship abound today. Some Christians see worship as kind of the filling station, where they receive the necessary resources for the normal activities of the week ahead. To them, worship is little more than a routine pause that refreshes. In the words of Brendan Manning, people like this want to get from God. They want to get just close enough to God to warm themselves with his love, but not close enough to be consumed by it. For others, worship is like a pep rally. To them, a meaningful worship service seems to be related to the length of the prayers or the loudness of the participants or the amount of energy expended in the process. They come to worship every week to be entertained, and they tend to view worship as something done to them or for them. rather than by them. Now, don't misunderstand me. In some ways, worship is a filling station. We meet together each week to be equipped and energized to do God's work in the world. And there is a sense in which it is also a pep rally. We come together to encourage one another, to cheer each other on. But the Bible teaches that worship is so much more than that. When we worship God, we are declaring his worth. I love how William Temple, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, described worship. He says, worship is the submission of all our nature to God. It is the quickening of the conscience by his holiness, the nourishment of our mind with his truth, the purifying of our imagination by his beauty, the opening of the heart to his love, and the surrender of the will to his purpose. Wonderful definition of what worship is all about. Temple reminds us that worship is the response of all of man to all that God has done. In worship, we experience the truth of James chapter 4, verse 8, as we draw near to God and he draws near to us. Worship, then, is best in the best in us, striving to be better. Is man and God communing together. Well, how can we make sure that authentic worship happens? How can we encounter the grace of God in worship so that we can be transformed and changed into better disciples of Jesus Christ? Well, if we are to experience genuine worship, then I think a proper attitude is required in three areas. First of all, we need a proper attitude about God. Some theologians have described God with the phrase holy other. Now, holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y, holy other. Meaning that God is not one of us, nor is he like us. And I like that phrase because God is beyond anything we could ever imagine. He is greater than we can comprehend, more magnificent than we could ever describe. He is good beyond description and powerful beyond description. He is holy beyond anything that is holy. He's completely independent of this world, and his involvement with humanity is purely by choice, not the result of any need or limitation on his part. He is wholly other. So we enter times of worship with an attitude of reverence and respect for God. Psalm 25 verse 14 says, friendship with God is reserved for those who reverence him. With them alone, he shares the secrets of his promises. Psalm 25:14. The prophet Isaiah wrote of a time of worship in which he learned to have reverence for God. You may remember what Isaiah chapter 6 records, a vision in which Isaiah saw God high and lifted up on his throne. And when that happened, Isaiah was overcome with an awareness of God's holiness, God's majesty. He heard the angel saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now, at this point, we need to understand that the Hebrew language has no words to express comparison. In English, we use words like good, better, and best, or big, bigger, and biggest. comparison. But the Hebrews didn't have words like that. So to express comparison, they use repetition. Many times in the Old Testament and the New Testament, you'll find words repeated to express intensity or comparison. If the Hebrews wanted to describe great joy, they said, joy, joy. If they wanted to speak of great fear, they said, fear, fear. You may remember the many times in Bible that Jesus said, verily, verily, I say unto you. When he said that, he's saying, what I am about to say is really, really true. Now, when the Hebrews wanted to express a superlative, when they wanted to say that something was the very best of the best, the greatest, they repeated the word 3 times. This occurs only twice in the Bible. Both times are very interesting scriptures. One's found in Revelation chapter 8, where John sees the judgments of God being poured out upon the earth. A great angel in the form of an eagle flies through the heavens crying, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth. Revelation chapter 8, verse 12. Woe, woe, woe. The angel is saying that there could be no greater time of trouble, no greater woe than this. The only time this superlative repetition is used is here in Isaiah chapter 6, where the angels cry, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. In other words, they are saying God is the holiest being in all of creation. There is no one, there is nothing that even compares to God's holiness. Worship begins with this attitude about God, this awe, this reverence, this awareness of God's supreme greatness. Verse 3 of our text says as much, that God is worthy of our worship because he is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hands are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. In this comparison of ocean depths and mountain peaks, the psalmist shows us the infinite greatness of our God. In essence, he challenges us to take a tape measure and stretch it from the deepest place on earth, which would be at the bottom of some sea somewhere, to the highest peak in the Himalayan mountain range, Earth's highest spot. And in doing so, see that our God is still infinitely greater. And someone that awesome, that great, is deserving of our worship and our praise. Look at verse 5. It says there, the sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry ground. Have you ever been out to the open sea? I mean, out in the middle of one of the earth's great oceans in the midst of a storm? It's pretty scary. But neither waves nor winds intimidate God. There is no downdraft that causes God to suck in his breath out of fear. There are no waves so big that cause him to lift his eyebrows in amazement. We experience genuine worship in remembering that is who God is. Who God is calms my fears. Psalm 139 says, if I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. He made it all. How glorious is God's strength? How deserving of our respect? So we should do as it says in Psalm 95, verse 6. We should come and worship and bow down. We should kneel before the Lord, our Creator, our Maker. In his book, Good Morning, Mary Sunshine, Chicago Tribune columnist Bob Greene chronicles the story of his infant daughter's first year of life, when little Amanda was crawling. He records, "There is something I'm having trouble getting used to. Every day I will be in my bed reading a book or watching TV, and I will look down at the foot of the bed, and there will be Amanda's little head staring back at me. Apparently, I've become one of the objects that fascinates her. It's so strange. All I can figure is that she likes the idea of coming in and looking at me. I'll return her gaze, and in a few moments she'll decide she wants to be back in the living room, and off she'll crawl again." You know, you and I are a lot like little Amanda. We crawl through life. And as we crawl through life, we have a need to stop from time to time and get on our knees at the foot of God's throne and simply look at God. We need to remind ourselves who He is, to reassure ourselves of His power and His love. And then with this reassurance, we can go on through life with confidence and peace. True worship begins with this attitude of reverence, this attitude of respect for who God is. But it doesn't stop there, because a proper attitude for God also leads to a proper attitude of ourselves. And that's the second point. When we are confronted with the holy perfection of God, our own imperfection stands out like a dark stain on a white shirt. We become painfully aware of our own sin. Simon Peter experienced this in Luke chapter 5 when Jesus told him to lower his net on the other side of the boat. Simon answered Jesus by saying that we've worked all night, we haven't caught anything. And then in almost a sarcastic tone, he says, "But if you say so, I'll let down my net on the other side of the boat." And then when he followed Jesus' instruction, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. In fact, when they began to load the fish into the boat, there were so many fish that the boat began to sink. All of this made Peter realize that he was in the presence of not just a man, but the living Christ. And in response, he fell on his knees. He said, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." When the prophet Isaiah stood in the presence of our holy, holy, holy God, he exclaimed, "Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live amongst a people of unclean lips." You see, there's something about being in the presence of God that makes us aware of our own sinfulness. Somehow, time spent in the presence of God opens our eyes to the ugliness of our thoughts and our actions and gives us a proper perspective on our own lives. Standing in the light of God's loving perfection enables us to see our lives clearly again. I remember being in Banff, Alberta, and seeing there an artist that was sitting in the main lobby of one of the large hotels, and she was looking out at the scenery and painting. From time to time, she would back away from the canvas and then come back to her painting. Someone asked her, "Why do you do that?" She replied, "I do that so I can view my painting from different angles. I need to keep my perspective correct," she said. "When I just work up close to the canvas, I risk losing my sense of perspective. And if that happens, I magnify the less important things and diminish the more important things of the painting." And as we go about our workday, day in and day out, we are apt to give the wrong things an exaggerated importance. We tend to emphasize the trivial at the expense of the vital. We drift into sinful actions and rationalize them away. And because of this, from time to time, we need to step aside like the painter and take the long view. We need to step back and let the light of God shine on our lives so we can see it clearly. God designed worship for just that purpose. Through worship, we come to see things as God sees them, and somehow the glamour of the material and the non-essential will lose its attractiveness, and a proper perspective is restored. In the 73rd Psalm, the psalmist writes, "My feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold when I envied the prosperity of the wicked, until I entered the sanctuary of God, and then I understood their final destiny." Then I understood things differently. Worship allows us to stop our hectic lifestyle just long enough to reevaluate our lives. There's a story of a wealthy entrepreneur who went on a hunting safari in Africa. And he chose a seasoned guide and hired local people to carry the necessary gear for him. Aggressive and very driven, the businessman wanted to move faster than his guides and his helpers were willing to move. Right from the very first day, he wanted to move faster. And every day after that, he pushed and drove his bewildered safari team from morning till night until they could hardly stand. Finally, the burden bearers stopped, and they wouldn't go any further. They would not stir from their resting in the shade. The American tycoon, used to instant obedience, was furious. He told them, "Get up! Get up," he yelled. "Move on, push on." But they just sat there and they didn't even meet his eyes. The impatient man stormed at his guide. He asked, "What's happening here? Why won't they move? Why won't they go on?" The guide replied, "They must stay here all day. They won't move no matter how much you shout, no matter how much you bully them. They will not move. We have been going too hard and too fast. And now, sir, we must let our souls catch up with our bodies. We must let our souls catch up with our bodies." So often we're like the tycoon. We rush through life until a crisis comes, and then we learn the hard way that we were designed to stop regularly and worship our Heavenly Father. And in so doing, let our souls catch up with our bodies. We need time with God, time to rest in His presence, time to get His perspective on our lives, time to ask for and to receive His forgiveness. So authentic worship requires, first of all, a proper attitude toward God, which leads, secondly, to a proper attitude about ourselves, which should lead to one more thing, that being a proper attitude about our daily lives. Worship must not stop with a proper or with a personal mystical experience. It must lead to practical ministry. Genuine worshipers see every task of every day as an opportunity to worship God. They follow Paul's guidance from Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, and they worship by presenting their whole lives, their whole bodies to God as living sacrifices. I read somewhere where Ruth Graham talks about her mother. She kept a sign in her kitchen that over the kitchen sink. The sign said, "Worship services held here 3 times daily." She saw washing dirty dishes as worship, and she was right. You see, worship is not a 1-day-a-week event. It's a lifestyle. J.C. Riley says the best public worship is that which produces the best private Christianity. The best public worship is that which produces the best private Christianity. You know, I enjoy doing weddings and being part of a wedding ceremonies involving men and women who love the Lord, but I tell all couples in premarital counseling that weddings are easy. It's staying married that's extremely difficult. Couples understand, and they understandably want to plan a wedding service. And I want to help them plan not just a wedding service, but a marriage. They want to know where the bridesmaids are going to stand. I want to help them learn where to stand when their relationship undergoes inevitable stress that comes when 2 people share their lives together. I can do a wedding in about 20 minutes almost with my eyes closed. But a marriage takes year after year of wide-eyed attention. Now, weddings are important. They're beautiful, they're impressive, they're emotional, sometimes they're very expensive. And we are careful to be at the right place at the right time and say the right words. Every detail of the surface is important. But all the same, weddings are easy. Marriage, on the other hand, is difficult and complex. It's in marriage that we work out every detail of the words, the promises, the commitments that we speak in the wedding ceremony. In marriage, we develop the long, rich life of faithful love that the wedding ceremony promises and announces. The event of the wedding without the life of marriage doesn't amount to very much. If there's no daily love shared, no continuing tenderness, no forgiveness asked and received, no attentive listening, no creative giving, no lifestyle of blessing each other as husband and wife, if there's none of that, then the wedding service is a sham, and the marriage is an empty charade. Well, listen. In the same way, if worship does not translate into a changed life, it's a sham. You see, God is not as so much interested in our activities of worship as he is in the actions of our lives. Look at Isaiah chapter 1, verses 12 to 17. God expresses this when he says, "I have more than enough burnt offerings. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. Stop bringing your meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. I cannot bear your evil assemblies. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Even if you offer many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Encourage the oppressed. Defend the cause of the fatherless. Plead for the widow. You know, in God's eyes, worship is much more than what happens Sunday morning. It's what happens all week long. Christians who want to experience genuine worship respond on Sundays as Isaiah did by saying, God, here I am, send me. Take my life and accept it as an offering to you. Use it as you see fit. And that allows us to, or that leads us to the most important part of this service of worship, this sermon this morning. This time set aside for the purpose of publicly responding to God by giving him our lives. Ask yourself if there's any way, any part of your life that you need to offer to God today. Part of your day-to-day existence that has not been worship. Perhaps you're not a Christian, and our focus on the holiness of God has made you aware that you need to ask for God's forgiveness through Jesus Christ. If that applies to you, I hope you'll respond. God is calling you to dedicate your life to him. The service begins when the worship ends. As we bring our time together to an end, let the worship commence. God bless. Have a wonderful day. Let's continue to exchange prayers daily.